YouTube, vinyl community, Beach Boys fans, random people on the internet. My name is Giggens. And we are here today to talk about the Beach Boys' 2006 release on Hallmark. Through Hallmark. The Beach Boys, Songs from Here and Back, unreleased live recordings, 3 new solo tracks. Rolls right off the tongue. Here's the back cover. Only officially released on CD, because this was 2006 and vinyl wasn't really a thing at this point. Well, it was, but not. It was and it wasn't. This was released in preparation for Father's Day 2006 through Hallmark Records, so through Hallmark stores. I keep saying Hallmark Records, but their name's on the back, so it's kind of like their record label. May 15th, 2006. I remember buying this the day it came out, and because I knew it was happening, because of the 3 new solo songs on here, which at that time was a big deal, because to have something that says the Beach Boys on it, but with 3 new songs that were obviously solo tracks, it was still exciting because we knew about the spirit of rock and roll from the early 90s with Brian. PT Cruiser was a newer song at that point, and Cool Head, Warm Heart was also a new one from Mike. But I was really excited about it. I remember going to a Hallmark store in the mall back home and going up to the counter and being like, "Do you have the new Beach Boys CD?" Thinking like, "This is weird," and they were like, we don't have a whole lot of music. Oh wait, no, we do. They had a box there of like 3 of them, so I grabbed one, and I paid apparently $10.95 for it back in 2006. So, it's an interesting little CD. It's not bad, but I would say if you're a collector of the Beach Boys stuff, it's worth having, for a couple of reasons. So most of this album is live stuff, and then you get 3 studio tracks at the end. The live stuff is mostly 1989, except for 2 tracks, Wouldn't It Be Nice and Good Vibrations, are from 1974, which is really cool. But kind of disjointed because of that in the presentation, the production, the whole thing's kind of changed, kind of different. But, you get Dance, 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 Surfer Girl, Kokomo, Little Deuce Coupe, and I Get Around. So 5 songs from 89, and then 2 from 74. The ones from 89 are okay. They just come across as kind of sounding uninspired, not fully into the idea of it. They kind of sound bored at this point. Whereas when you hear Wouldn't It Be Nice, and especially Good Vibrations, they're so into it. Obviously Ricky Furtar's on drums with those 2 songs, but their interest level is just so peaked, and you can tell that they were still riding high off that early 70s roots rock kind of feel of getting their act back together again and becoming a whole different group. This was the summer of Endless Summer when that came out, but they were still playing their current stuff at that time and really still trying to prove themselves before it became the oldies factory that it did become. But 89, this was the Beach Boys becoming the Full House, Home Improvement version of the band that would happen in the 90s. And it kind of sounds like it. They just sound like they're going through the motions. It's not very exciting. They're well produced, they're well played. It sounds good, like the actual sound of the recording sounds really good, but it just doesn't do much for me in the way of catching your interest. Surfer Girl's got a bit of this like really cheesy school dance vibe, which I wasn't really into. Little Deuce Coupe is kind of plodding along where it should be like, speeding along. It's about a car. And it doesn't go anywhere. It's kind of stalling. I Get Around isn't too bad. And then Kokomo is not my favorite version. It's interesting to hear it though, because the song was so new at this point. Hearing them still trying to like nail it down is interesting. Not essential, if you ask me. But Good Vibrations is fantastic. That version of the band from the early 70s was really tight. If you love the Beach Boys in concert album, at least listen to this for that one song. It's worth it. And then Al is doing Wouldn't It Be Nice from 74, and that's not too bad either. But the 3 new songs on here, The Spirit of Rock and Roll. So if you were a Brian Wilson fan and you had the internet, you most likely had access to Sweet Insanity and all this other early 90s stuff. Then he never officially released. And there's a version of The Spirit of Rock and Roll from that time that's not bad, and this version definitely improves on that early version for sure. Production-wise, his current band at the time, in the mid-2000s, which was a top-notch band. They were the ones who did Smile, That Lucky Old Sun. That era of his group was absolutely fascinating. But it's really not a bad track. I mean, it's fun. It's got a good pace to it. I like the rhythm. The delivery is cool, and there's a couple of cool breakdowns in the middle where it's just kind of focusing on their voices with a couple of drops of music added in between. That's a lot of fun. The solos on here sound a little dated for me. They do sound like a late 80s, early 90s kind of presentation, which is fine, but overall, not a bad track. And at the time, I remember being so stoked about it, being like, wow, this is a new Brian Wilson song. This is great. And I still feel that way a little bit. For me, it's definitely nostalgia for sure, because you're hearing this stuff and you're like, oh, I remember when this came out. I remember hearing it. I remember driving around and playing it. So it's really not bad. Then you get PT Cruiser, which has every single cliche you can imagine shoved into one song. I love Al's songs, I really do, but like this one is just it's not so good, Al, to quote the Weezers, but he takes every like rhyme that the Beach Boys already did, like mixing, Woodies and Fine and all this other stuff. I mean, it sounds like a Beach Boys ripoff song, or a Jane and Dean song. It's not bad. It's well played. It's done professionally. The solo on it is awesome. I love the guitar tone they did on that solo. I don't know who played that or how they got that tone, but that's very, very cool. I really enjoyed that. That's my favorite part of the whole song is the guitar solo. So that's not bad. But overall, it's okay. And then Cool Head and Warm Heart, honestly, might be my favorite song on the album. Just gonna throw that out there. It's really pretty decent. It's a chill, calm song about Mike just singing about how to keep your head, man. Don't lose your head. It's enjoyable. There's some decent chord changes. It's really well sung. There's some good group harmonies. It's simple. It's relaxing. It's got a nice message. I mean, I really do think I enjoyed that song the most. I remember playing that song a lot on my radio show in college at the time when this came out, because I really liked that song. It stays in your head. It's catchy. It's hooky. I mean, it's got a lot going for it, and it's simplistic delivery. It's not going to blow your mind, but it's also not the worst thing ever. It's really pretty good. One takeaway that I get from this thing, though, is when you hear these three separate songs, you realize how much they need each other. They're great. They can do things on their own. That's fine. But when you hear one solo against another solo against another solo, it's one of those things where it's like, the sum is greater than the whole of its parts, or whatever the phrase is. Like, they need each other. If they had done all three of these songs with all three of their voices mixed in all three of these songs, and they all brought something to each track, that would have been fascinating. That would have been really cool. 2006 was an interesting year to be a Beach Boys fan, though, because I remember that year they also got their Platinum Awards for Sounds of Summer, which came out in 2003, the Greatest Hits album, which to this day probably is the greatest introduction you can get to that band. But they all got back together on the roof of Capitol Records to celebrate the awards for this thing, and David Marks was there. It was one of the first times he had seen all the guys in one place in a million years. I have pictures of that on my wall I had this collage that I made when I was, 20 or something. And there were a lot of pictures at that time from different magazines when this happened, because it was a big deal to have the Beach Boys together. You have to remember, if you're kind of new to the Beach Boys these days, there were times for a long time where they didn't see each other. I mean, that's kind of how it is on and off nowadays, but at that point, Brian hadn't been with the band since basically 1996 or 7, pretty much maybe when Carl died, and Al, same thing. So, there was a good 7 or 8 years there where it had become the Mike and Bruce show, and then Al was doing his thing with the Beach Boys and Family and Friends, and Brian was doing his thing as a solo artist. So they had just completely splintered, and to have them come back together again was a big deal. It was really cool, and there was videos at the time. There were pictures of them, hanging out and laughing and smiling and just being nice to each other. So that was really nice, and unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. It took another 6 years for them to get back together again, but that was cool. So, and then right after this, that Warmth of the Sun Greatest Hits came out. I think that was 2007 when that one came out. And then the Summer Love Songs CD came out a couple years after that. So this was an interesting time to be a Beach Boys fan, especially if you were a Brian Wilson fan. I mean, he was just on top of the world with his solo records, just boom, 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 coming out, like Getting Over My Head, Smile, That Local Old Sun. I mean, he was just like, every couple of years a new Brian Wilson thing came out. So it was exciting. And it still is, obviously, but at that point it was so new because he hadn't done so much in the 90s, and all of a sudden the 2000s hit, and just boom. 2004 to 2010, he was cranking stuff out like crazy. So yeah, little additional snippet of additional there. But overall, I mean, this thing, it's not gonna blow your mind. There's really nothing to this thing. So there's the disc there, and just a cheesy little thing saying, "Oh, if you're driving in your car, oh, it's the summertime, put on the Beach Boys." One of those things. But if you can find it, I mean, it's not super rare. I mean, it only came out that one year for that one pressing, I think. But if you find it, pick it up. It's worth it for the last 3 tracks, and it's worth it for Good Vibrations. That live version is really cool. And who knows, you might like those live versions from '89. I might just be a little heavy-handed in my delivery of thinking what the Beach Boys should sound like, or what kind of presentation they should put into their music. But that's it. Kind of a short review on this thing. Just kind of a a fun little curio in the Beach Boys discography. But I'd probably give this thing like a 6 out of 10. I mean, it's nowhere near essential, but if you're a collector of the Beach Boys stuff, pick it up. I think it'd be fun for you to have in your collection. So that's it. My name is Giggens. This guy gets a 6 out of 10 because there's not much to it. It's not much to it. If there were more solo tracks, if they had gotten together and did one song together, that would have been amazing. But it's worth it for the originals, or the new ones rather. Yeah, my name is Giggens. This has been the Beach Boys. Songs from Here and Back. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.